What American Sign Language is teaching me about effective science communication. This is the title of a recent article written by Paige Jarreau on her blog titled From the Lab Bench. In this segment of Questions of the Day, host Fanuel Muindi talks with science communicator extraordinaire Paige Jarreau and Rami Traurig, a deaf biologist and public health professional at the NIH, to discuss the article and more.
All right, welcome to Questions of the Day. Welcome back, actually. I am so honored to be joined today by two very, very special guests, Paige Jarreau. She's a boundary spanner, a science communicator, bioengineer, researcher. I mean, there's so many terms for you, Paige, that I don't know what to use anymore. And also joining us is Rami Traurig, a deaf biologist and public health professional at the NIH's Center for Alzheimer's and Related Dementias, or commonly named as CARD. And so we're here today, and I want to mention that Gabe, who is our ASL interpreter, is also with us for this conversation. So we're here today because Paige recently wrote a piece that really just caught my attention, and it was titled What American Sign Language, ASL, and we'll use that terminology, ASL, is teaching me about effective science communication. And I'll be honest that I hadn't really thought of science communication in ASL until I fully read this piece. And so, Paige, thank you for bringing this to my attention. So in your opening paragraph, Paige, you write the following, and I quote, "I really do feel that learning ASL is doing something more. It's opening up new pathways of thinking, particularly visual thinking, that are making me question the ways my first language leads me to think and allowing me to express myself in a completely new way," end quote. So Paige, in your article, you mentioned that you started learning ASL to be able to communicate with a deaf scientist. So both of you, can you just take us back on that story, starting with you, Paige?
Yeah, I had always wanted to learn ASL since my sister started learning several years ago. She tried to teach me a little. At the time, I didn't have a whole lot of time to learn, but then I started working for CARD and I found out Rami was joining CARD, and just learning that we would have a deaf scientist at CARD, I was like, okay, this is time to learn. So I downloaded an app, Lingvano, and just started to learn there, and then started to take some live classes. And I was really excited the first time that I met Rami after I had been learning ASL for a couple months, and we were able to have a conversation, and that was really special for me.
Rami, how about you? What was it like just interacting with Paige in those early days as she was learning and the rest?
Yeah, when we started working and I met Paige at work, I found out that she was really motivated to learn ASL, and she wanted to do some side projects between science related to ASL, and we started working on that. And we have like ASL chats with other scientists at work where we can communicate efficiently. And we figured out how deaf people can work in the same context, like in the lab or the same way as other scientists. And I think ASL can express different like 3D visuals of those scientific things, like a variant in genes or other things. It's more of a picture way to explain. You know, you can visualize instead of using words in English and depending on that. So we think that's cool. And I'm very happy I met Paige because, again, she's so enthusiastic about learning ASL and just giving us different projects related to ASL. So it's really been cool. And I think it's good exposure for the other deaf scientists out there, because there's not many scientists out there who are deaf as well. So I think this is a good start. It's good exposure for other deaf people who are interested in science.
And my understanding, Rami, is that you are the first deaf scientist, I believe, in CARD. Is that right?
Yeah. I started last July. So I'm still new. And yeah, I'm the first scientist at CART.
That's wonderful. And so, Paige, in your piece, you say that there's a lack of science communication in ASL, right? Created by and for deaf and hard of hearing individuals, which presents this barrier to exposure. And as Rami kind of alluded to this, and success in scientific education and research. Can you tell us more about this because you're a science communicator, why the lack of ASL in science communication?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I went recently to Gallaudet University and saw many deaf scientists who are doing a lot of really cool science communication. But so that's amazing within the deaf community, but outside, a lot of hearing science communicators are not learning ASL or aware of how important it is to communicate science, not just through captions of a video, but actually in ASL as its own language that can show science, literally show science instead of just explaining it in words.
Yeah, it's the visual element, right? And I think throughout your piece, you keep referring to this, that it actually transforms you in unique ways and be able to think differently as well, as I even opened up. Rami, how has the experience been for you in your communication efforts through ASL?
Communication in ASL with what regards?
Through science communication, as you're communicating your science and what you're doing.
I think communicating in science language in ASL, I mean, there's so many benefits to the visual language because you're drawing a 3D picture, like DNA. The sign is DNA. So you show what DNA actually looks like with your fingers instead of depending on those words. So people can visualize what DNA looks like. And I think ASL would help many people to understand many science concepts easier and more clearly.
And Paige, do you think there should be a little bit more integration of ASL in training, if you will, in graduate programs or just science communication training initiatives?
Yeah, I think it would be great. So one of the things I found really interesting with Rami is early on, I was asking him about like attending seminars and that kind of thing. And he has interpreters with him at all times at NIH, but they have to fingerspell a lot of the scientific jargon. And so imagine a talk filled with jargon and all those words fingerspelled. I mean, how hard it would be to that's so much work for your mind to have to read that fingerspelling and then translate it into pictures in your mind versus the power of ASL is to show that in the first place. So there's some really cool initiatives within the deaf community to create more iconic like science for science things. Like I was learning from a conference that I went to, like a gene being like literally the sign for a gene where it shows you like the 4 bases and the structure of the DNA helix as opposed to like spelling that out. So I think it's important, it'd be really cool for more science communicators to just learn how to think visually and know how to communicate that with their hands. I think I'm attracted to this based on like my background in dance and like performance arts, where you learn a bit more about like acting and showing things out in your body and how interesting that can be as a different mode of communication.
Yeah, and it's great that you mentioned the dance. So in your article, you mentioned dance your PhD, right? I was thinking, wow, it'd be interesting to see if there was like a sign your PhD, right? Is that kind of what you're leading towards there?
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
And in your piece, so you mentioned you attended the STEM Sign Language Summit, and I'm not sure if Rami, you were there as well. Were you both there?
Oh no, I didn't go. Paige went.
So Paige, can you just share a little bit more? What was your experience? What changed for you after attending this conference?
Yeah, well, Rami inspired me to go, first of all, and he graduated from Gallaudet, so he knew some individuals there that I could connect with. But going, first of all, I'm pretty new to ASL. I've been learning it for the past year, but going and seeing talks for an entire weekend in ASL, I mean, it was quite overwhelming, but it was a lot of good practice for my eyes. Honestly, I just find it so, it's just a completely different experience to honestly give my ears a break and just like, you have to be cued in to these talks. I mean, people are talking about science and I'm, watching intently. Like I can't take my eyes away because I'll miss something. And it's an incredible experience. It's hard to explain, but there was a researcher there that was talking about her work with sea turtles, and she was telling the story about her first time seeing the sea turtles like lay their eggs and the eggs hatching, and just her body language. I mean, literally, she recreated that moment on the beach, like what she was doing and her facial expressions and how she was feeling in a very like performance way. That was fascinating. Like I just didn't want that talk to end. And I've not had that experience so much with like a really good science talk in words. I mean, if someone's telling a really good story and using expressive language, maybe it can achieve that. But I just thought the ASL hit different.
Yeah, and I think that excitement came across in your piece as well. Rami, I'm just thinking from your side, how has ASL like transformed your own way you approach science in a way? Like, has it changed any? How maybe I'll rephrase it. How has it affected the way you're approaching your science to others that you've seen who are not deaf, for example?
So I try to make it very clear by developing some signs for other scientists so we can communicate. Like, for example, if we're writing something and we have to show something, instead we can just sign it so it's quicker and it's clear too. So I think it's just practicing with other scientists with a few signs that hearing scientists can understand quickly and identify clearly. And I think that really saves a lot of time when we're doing work or we're communicating.
Yeah. And what's the biggest challenge?
ASL helps me. It just helps us save a lot of time at the end of the day because we tend to do different projects. And in the lab environment, I think writing sometimes is a detriment, or doing something else wastes our time and it's not efficient. So I think ASL just makes everything easier and clearer for everyone.
Yeah. And as someone, again, I haven't experienced ASL myself. My mind is right now full of ideas. I'm like, oh my God, I missed out on a lot. Rami, could you share a little bit more in terms of like the challenges that maybe you have experienced along the way? And Paige, same question to you.
So challenges so far, they haven't been too bad, but I know that what other people are talking about around me, I might miss that, or what they're doing in the lab. I tend to be focused on my zone and my work. And communication out of the lab, when they're around me in the lab environment, I can't really hear. So that's one challenge. Sometimes I wish I could know what someone was doing besides me in the project in the lab without asking, But one other thing in the lab environment is to make sure we have an open space where I can see people doing their work, or we can communicate that way. But with my current lab, I mean, we have a pretty good dev space, and I can see everyone doing their work and everyone communicates with me. So it's really helpful. With current day technology as well, and the building of technology, I think everything's better. and compared to old labs or an old building I've been in before.
Yeah, it helps.
And yeah, in the lab environment, we tend to use our phone, the Bing app, where I can communicate with other scientists quickly in words instead of ASL sometimes. So that helps as well. And Paige, you were going to say something?
Yeah, at CARD, we have a lot of windows. Like there's glass everywhere. So, I mean, it's cool for me because I can see Rami like through the window in the lab, and we can communicate. You know, that's a benefit of ASL is we don't have to be near each other. We can be across the window and saying hi and communicating.
Thank you for that. So, Paige, what more needs to be done in this space? You mentioned, science communicators. There's a lot that science communicators can learn from ASL. So, what more needs to be done?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, I don't want to speak for Rami, but I think that it means a lot for hearing individuals who are working in the same spaces as deaf scientists to learn some signs. I mean, I think it means a lot, and it can open up new ways of thinking for yourself. In a way, it's similar to science communication. Like every scientist learning a little bit about science communication, it can open up new ways, right, of you thinking about your own project, seeing the bigger picture. We talk about art. It's cool to get involved with that and collaborate with an artist because it helps you see your own science in a new way. I think ASL has done that for me. I mean, even just like little examples. I was talking to Rami about what he's working on, and I was asking him to describe. We have a term that we use a lot in CARD called long read sequencing. It's like, Rami was saying, it's like long read sequencing for a type of DNA sequencing that we do. But even that, like, is a very English word, interpretation, like just like long read. It's just interpreting the words itself that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And we were talking about how could we sign that? There is no sign for that, but it's based on like a tiny pore where like DNA is like going into this pore and coming out and being read along the way. So like, could you sign that? Could you create an iconic sign for that would actually help many people? Me not knowing what that technology is, if someone shows it to me like that, I'm like, oh, now I understand how it works. So I think discovering the language of ASL can help just open up your mind to new ways of thinking about how to communicate science, I think.
Yeah. And Rami, from your end, what more needs to be done in thinking about integrating ASL into science communication and science overall?
I think ASL would help so many scientists to understand science things they're working on. I mean, it shows function. You can show movement through ASL. ASL is like a 3D language. So I think it would help so much visually and helping to communicate with other scientists clearly about function or roles. I mean, there's so many things ASL can apply to in science in general.
Yeah, and in your piece, Paige, you mentioned I think there's a YouTube page, right? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so there's a group called Atomic Hands that it creates some wonderful descriptions of science concepts in ASL. I think they're both deaf scientists there. I know that one of them is a professor at Gallaudet. And so just watching their videos as a hearing person, like they were describing the eclipse the other day, right? And explaining the eclipse, I can tell you in words, okay, the moon comes in front of the sun, but you would have to visualize that in your mind. As opposed to when they were signing it, they're talking about this like the sun and the moon, and like it comes like this, and the moon is blocking the sun, and just showing that they do things like that where like imagine being, I don't know, any kid or a deaf kid who's trying to learn science, that's a much more engaging way than having to read about it in captions of a video, right?
Yeah, and are you seeing more efforts and initiatives in ASL, integrating ASL and science communication from your end, Paige?
Well, I'm just discovering this myself. I know that I feel like recently, just the rise of Instagram, I mean, there's more visibility, right? Like deaf scientists and other deaf individuals can put content out there, and I think there's a lot more content to be found. I mean, it's probably easier to learn ASL than ever, just like other things, because there's an app for it. You can get online video lessons. Like, you don't have to leave your house and you can learn it, right? Which is super cool. I think a lot of that came from the pandemic too, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for incorporating it into our science communication.
Yeah, and in your piece, actually, you do share links to some articles, right? Really talking about the research, which we didn't get into today, but the visual aspect, right? The cognitive aspect of what happens to those who are trying to practice, right? And I like the way you frame it, like it's a practice that you can learn a new language, if you will. So what are you both working on now together? Because I know you have a partnership going on. So Rami, start with you. What are you working on with Paige right now?
So I'm trying to do an ASL chat with other scientists and other people who work at CARD. And I'm trying to develop some signs for our lab. Specifically, like she just said, long read sequencing function. There's little details with signs that we're trying to dial in and develop. And we want to make videos and other things. And I think Paige has a lot of ideas, and I think they're great. So we have to start with something, and it will snowball and lead to other things.
Unfortunately, Rami has a day job as a biologist. But I try to rope him into science communication projects whenever I can. I'm like, hey, Rami, you want to like create some videos? And he's always game. So.
And Paige, what are you working on with? Like, what's your sort of next steps here, right? And this article is out now, right? This piece is out. What do you hope to start happening, at least from your end, right?
Yeah, I mean, my first goal is becoming fluent in ASL, and secondly, just exposing myself as much as I can to science communication in ASL, and doing more of that for CARD. So we recently created a kind of virtual tour of the CARD lab where we interviewed different scientists, and I want to translate that into an ASL version, just because, like, again, we're saying it's not the same. It's not enough to have captions in a video because of how different the language is. I mean, a completely different language. So how incredible it would be to just do more of our science communication in ASL. I was talking to Rami about, impact of, dementia in the community, in the deaf community. I mean, especially, there's a big association between hearing loss and dementia, but also even within the deaf community, like, I'm sure there could be more resources in communication. If you think about centers like CARD leading the way in research on dementia, I mean, who better to communicate that than us in ASL if we're not doing it? No one else is, because we're at the front of that field. So my goal is to do as much as I can to help advocate for the need for this.
Yeah, I think we'll be on standby to see what happens as other initiatives come online and other ways, right, of integrating ASL into science communication. Now, Rami, I hear you have an extensive sneaker collection. Is that true?
Yes. I have one room filled with shoes. I would say over 150 pairs. I started collecting since maybe high school and college, and I've built it up over time. So I'm trying to reduce it a bit now. Now my priorities are changing. I have some shoes I haven't worn or touched.
That is wonderful. There's a great interview that Rami conducted that is on card. I will put the link in the description for people to read. Paige, Rami, and Gabe, thank you, all of you, for joining me today in opening this conversation. I really do think this is just an opening. There are, I think, many threads here we want to follow through. As you guys do your projects, just know that we are right here. We would love to decode them and understand what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it. And I think this is an important topic that we'll continue to follow through and bring others on the program to share their stories. So with that, thank you so much to the both of you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you too.